I thought this was a really great article. Do you want to explain it, J.Cal?
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick overview and then you can dive right in since you put it on the docket. Psychiatrist and author Sally Satel, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct, wrote an article for The Atlantic entitled "The Experts Somehow Overlooked Authoritarians on the Left." The main point here is that Trump's presidency sparked a ton of research and coverage of authoritarianism on the right, but mostly ignored the left, with some researchers even suggesting that left-wing authoritarianism isn't real. In an email to Satel, a social psychologist from Rutgers said the following: for 70 years, the lore in the social sciences has been that authoritarianism has been found exclusively on the political right. Why is that? One reason left-wing authoritarianism barely showed up in social psychology research is that most academic experts in the field are based at institutions where prevailing attitudes are far to the left of society as a whole. Sacks?
Well, actually, Chamath put this on the docket. So, Chamath, do you want to introduce what you liked about it?
The reason I saw this and I thought it was so interesting was basically we had an entire body of research trying to understand why some folks are attracted to these authoritarian figures like Trump. And overwhelmingly, all the research at the time said they only exist on the right. And, and all of this started after Hitler. And so there was all this research around the, social and attitudinal reactions to Hitler and how he came to power, and then all of the iterations of folks like him on the right afterwards. And so people put Trump in that category, and then they said it can only exist there. But as it turns out, when this person did this research and she surveyed 7,000 people, and all of this data was very well summarized in this Atlantic article, which I'm sure we can post in the show notes that folks should read, lo and behold, it actually exists on both sides. So as it turns out, the extreme right and the extreme left are exactly the same. They're moral absolutists. They believe in themselves and themselves only. And they believe anybody else that's outside of where they are is fundamentally in the wrong. And if you actually look at that and see how Trump behaved in his presidency, and now how you see how the left names and shames, you actually find a lot of commonality. So the reason I found that article interesting is that it actually says, again, what we've been saying, which is coming down the middle and finding, reasonable compromise is the only way forward, because the minute you start moving in either direction, you are the same. And that person is an ugly person that we don't want around.
Let me give the money quote and then get your feedback, Friedberg. The similarities in this study included, quote, similarities between authoritarianism on both sides, left and right, preference for social uniformity, check, prejudice toward different others, willingness to wield group authority to coerce behavior, cognitive rigidity, aggression and punitiveness toward perceived enemies, outsized concern for hierarchy, and, as Chamath pointed out, moral absolutism. Friedberg.
I think authoritarian figures resolve when a population feels insecure. So, we talked about this last pod, but I do think that, the notion of freedom emerges after the comfort of security has been provided. And I think the absence of security drives people away from the drive towards freedom. Like when you have a feeling of insecurity with respect to kind of your ability to get a job. Remember, Hitler rose to power when unemployment, post Weimar Republic was skyrocketing. People, couldn't get jobs. They couldn't afford food. And the authoritarian figure was going to provide the security needed, I think, to resolve the concerns that the population had. And then, people latch onto that. So, there are moments in time when I think authoritarianism can emerge with different forms of resolution. It doesn't necessarily mean that the authoritarian actor needs to take a left or a right point of view. They're just going to give you a path to security when you're feeling insecure. If you don't feel insecure, you're going to say that's ridiculous. So countries that are wealthy, countries that are privileged with the opportunities that maybe the United States has, are less likely and less inclined to fall in favor of authoritarian leaders. And then as we slip backwards economically, unemployment-wise, et cetera, we're more likely to be in favor of those sorts of actors. And so I think that, we'll see him emerge.
Yeah, but don't you think it's crazy that we actually didn't think it could exist in one end of the political spectrum, and now it does? You have a point in that, or no?
I never really understood the whole, Hitler is purely a right-wing guy. he was a socialist, and he was trying to enable socialized services and socialized systems for people. In a lot of political circles, that would be argued as being a very kind of left point of view. And so I don't know if it. Let's go beyond Hitler. You're right. The Nazi Party was a National Socialist Party. That's what the name of the party was. But there's also Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao. I mean, if you're paying attention to history, you know that there's been authoritarianism on the left, not just the right. And so, but in the universities and in the media, they only want to focus on the right-wing version of it. And I think what this study does is it upends 70 years of dogma that authoritarianism is only to be found on the political right. I mean, it's obviously can be found on the political left as well. And you can see that in cancel culture, in speech restrictions, in these very aggressive COVID mandates that are now happening. You can see it in the ghoulishness. Anytime somebody in the right, dies from COVID, I mean, there's always some chortling on the part of the left about this. The harsh penalties for noncompliance. I mean,
cognitive rigidity is the one that stands out for me. Like, there is just, on the left, they make a decision, Amazon is bad, and they cannot move off of that, right, David? Like,
well, what about willingness to wield group authority to coerce behavior? And what about aggression and punitiveness towards perceived enemies?
Cancel culture. That would be cancel culture.
That to me is,
Sacks,
yes.
It begs a good question, which is, what socialist regimes have come to power without an authoritarian figure? Has there? I'm just trying
none.
To, right,
well, they're all revolutionaries. Right. And actually, the study has a really good point about this, which is they say that the researchers describe what they called anti-hierarchical aggression. So one of the traits of authoritarianism is they call it an outsized concern for hierarchy. But leftists think that they don't believe in hierarchy, but actually they do. They believe in an anti-hierarchical hierarchy, which is they want to turn upside down the social hierarchy, and they're willing to justify the ends justify the means. In other words, if you can turn the hierarchy upside down, they'll let you do anything. And it's actually pretty scary. That's where the revolution comes from.
Here's a practical thing, JKL, about what you said, which illustrates this point even further. Right now, we have a $3.5 trillion bill kind of meandering through Congress. And, it's very much a question mark about whether it gets passed or not. And one of the elements that's in there is free community college. Now, when it passes, if it passes, there's a lot of support that that's something that the government should do. It's a good thing. But if you're a private company like Amazon, who just announced that they will give you free college, they're still a bad company. And this is the example of this intellectual rigidity that doesn't actually see the forest from the trees. What do you really want? Do you want the process where you control and you meter out progress? Or do you actually want the outcome where somebody can get a job where they make $15 or $20 an hour and also now get college paid for?
Yes.
I personally want the latter.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd much better if the government didn't have to provide that.
I'd love it if the government could pay for it, but I'm really glad that Amazon is in a position to pay for it as well. But if you start to become absolutist and say, well, no, this needs to be top down and metered out this way, and any private organization that wants to try to do it is still bad, I think that's where that rigidity holds us all back. It's unnecessary.
Here's where I see the rigidity, Chamath, is they keep saying gig workers are bad. Nobody should be allowed to be a gig worker. And David had a great interview with the ride-sharing guy on Call-In, in which they talked about the fact, and this is somebody who is super pro-advocate of drivers, said, listen, 80% of people do not want to do shift work. They do not want the government dictating how they work. And I talked anecdotally with an Uber driver. He said he's making like $70 an hour during peak hours. They were fighting to get minimum wage for drivers. Now drivers are making $20, $30, $40, $50 an hour. Uber rides have gone and Lyft rides have gone massively. There's a massive competition.
The free market works.
Well, and they can't take the win. They still are so rigid on the left that they're demanding whatever that woman's name is, who is, in the pocket of the
Lorena Gonzalez
in the pocket of the unions. How cynical are they? The victory is upon them. Yes. People are getting paid 5 times more, 3 times more than minimum wage, and they still want to screw them.
The takeaway for a lot of people should be that your spidey senses should go up when folks present solutions as a choice of one source only. You know, when things can only happen in one way, and it's the way that I feel the most comfortable.
Yeah.
Your spidey sensor should go up and you should think to yourself, really? Is that really the only way? Like, can't we have choice? Yeah. Can't we have different ways of solving this?
Maybe we could run incentives? An experiment and see what happens? Go ahead, Sacks.
Well, I think your spidey sense should also go up whenever somebody is basically saying that speech needs to be censored for some higher purpose. You know, that whenever people are trying to abridge and take away our rights and our sort of long-held values, our freedoms, you have to start getting concerned. And there's always a reason why they want to do it. In the study, the quote that the left-wing authoritarians agreed with was, getting rid of inequality is more important than protecting the so-called right to free speech. So there's always some higher reason. The ends always justify the means. But that's what you have to look out for, is when they're taking away your right to speech.
Another fun proof point, fun because it's Dave Chappelle, that you can listen to or watch to see a flavor of this left-wing authoritarianism, is called Redemption Song, which is a little clip he put out recently. And the entire clip is more about him getting his body of work back from Comedy Central. But the part in the beginning talks about folks on the left that really tried to dunk on him when he got COVID. And you should just listen to his reaction and how he frames it, because I think it's pretty powerful. And it explains that extremism on both sides, they actually end up looking the same.
Yeah, aggression and punitiveness towards perceived enemies. And I think that applies to anyone who defies the whatever the conventional wisdom is on COVID. There's another example in the study of that the people who, the left-wing authoritarians, agreed with the statement, I cannot imagine myself becoming friends with a political conservative. So, you know, you've got these social groups that are completely uniform. And by the way, there have been like studies for a long time showing that liberals are twice as likely as conservatives to be upset if their son or daughter were to marry someone of the opposite party. So this has been turned up in polls for a while, but and you've seen it on universities and college campuses, right? But there's this idea that, you know, anybody of the other political side is just suspect, you know, morally suspect, needs to be shunned, needs to be expelled. Like, those are the people you have to be concerned about.
Yeah, you can't be friends. I can't be friends with you, Sacks, because you voted for Trump. It's just ridiculous. People have this. No, but I think it's the derangement to give the other side of this. I think Trump was so extreme and so trolling and so great. I mean, if you think about his superpower, it was to troll the left and put them into such a deranged mindset that they did actually become that which they hated most.
Right, but he did troll the left. But here's the thing: is that we only hear in the media about the authoritarianism of the Trump administration. How many times were they screaming fascism during the Trump years? And now today, and of course, you know, if you go to MSNBC, it's January 6th all day, all the time. That's all they want to talk about. But there's a total blind spot with respect to the authoritarian tendencies of the left, which we see right now in COVID policy. I mean, it is getting so extreme right now. And I mean, Friedberg, you posted the breaking news